we've heard a little bit about Otho's background, but Fred and Ernest, if you could just give us a snippet on your farm, your operation, and then we'll go into the question and answer phase of soil fertility and irrigation management.
Yeah, I'm Ernest Martin. I'm manager at the Bainbridge Produce Auction, and till it gets really going early in the season, I got 2 high tunnels where I raise tomatoes at, and once they're brought over when the season really starts going, so that works out pretty good for me.
My name is Fred Weaver. I'm on the committee at the Bainbridge Produce Auction. I also raise a lot of vegetables and greenhouse tomatoes in high tunnels, and that's about it.
Mid-chew. Sorry about that. The high tunnel crops are not rain fed. Of course, I mean, one of the benefits of a high tunnel is that you put it's like a giant rainout shelter. Okay, the rain doesn't fall in there except for when they're ours, and it rains inside from the mist, the water that's coming up out of the ground. But by and large, we have to irrigate the crops. So, Fred and Ernest and Otho, if you could give kind of a summary of your practices for the crops that you're using or have experienced in your case, Otho, in a research or extension capacity. We, I think, are committed to drip irrigation, but what are the main differences that you see between a high tunnel grown fertigation program or fertility and irrigation program versus a field program?
Maybe we should talk about fertilization for a moment. The question is, how do you fertilize in a high tunnel? Well, if you're doing it strictly organically, you go with the compost, manure, and so forth, which is good. But then if you're not doing that, how do you fertilize? And I think, from my experience, you just simply use the same parameters that you would use for outdoor crops. Just take a soil test and have it analyzed by the Extension Service or whoever, and fertilize in that capacity. I do have a rule of thumb, and people don't want the soil test, and well, I'm not sure it's perfect, but 2.5 pounds of triple 10 per 100 square feet works. 2.5 pounds of triple 10 per 100 square feet is a good rule of thumb. I'm not sure that's perfect, but for some people just don't want to test, so you give them what sort of works. But the thing about the high tunnel is that there's a relation, I think, between soil fertility and watering, because the high tunnel covers the area, it's a rain shelter, and the soil never gets wet. And therefore, you have different situations. Outdoors, you might have a lot of rain, and it might leach out the nitrogen, but it won't leach out in the high tunnel. So in a sense, you conserve a lot of your nutrients in a high tunnel, and therefore, maybe you don't have to fertilize as often.
Once they're brought over when the season really starts going, so that works out pretty good for me.
My name is Fred Weaver. I'm on the committee at the Bainbridge Produce Auction.
For a whole year or 2 years or 3 years, it's hard to get a lot of water down in there. So it might be between crops you need to water very, very heavily, just simply to make sure the soil is wet. And then the other thing I want to mention is about the use of compost in high tunnels, not necessarily as a fertility practice, but as just plain physics. From our experience, when we've added a lot of compost, I mean good compost, like 2 to 2.5 inches thick, and roll-till it in, you still have a high concentration of compost on the surface. An oily surface, which means that it will repel water. And what you can find, in some cases, you'll find water channeling down through the compost in the soil instead of by capillary action going out. So you'll find out that you don't have uniform watering. That was our experience, and we did a couple of years. So if you're going to use compost heavily, make sure it's well mixed with the soil, and make sure you water the soil very thoroughly. It's overhead before you plant to make sure the soil is wet.
Ernest, any comments to add to that?
Well, I have no experience with compost. I strictly irrigate through drip irrigation, and you really got to watch it in the spring that you don't get too much water to them if you don't have a lot of sunshine. But once the fruit sets on, I irrigate about 2 times a week or something like that. And as far as fertilization, we use strictly liquid fertilizer, the grower's fertilizer, through the drip line, and a lot of foliage feeding up to every other day sometimes, which I think helps a lot with blight because it keeps the leaves green. And we use some Miller chemical fertilizer through the drip line. But one thing I've seen in our area is people using too much nitrogen, and I've heard, I don't know if it's true, that it'll push the blossoms out too far and cause problems with the not germinating like they should. But so all the nitrogen I'm putting on is what's in the grower's fertilizer, or I use a lot of 9-15-30.
Fred, additions?
The difference between high tunnel tomatoes and field tomatoes is in a high tunnel you have a controlled environment. You can control your water, your heat, your temperature, and your plants will be healthier. Stress is what causes a tomato to get diseases. And I would recommend anybody to have an alarm. They call it a thermal alarm. A lot of these places sell them. If your temperature, you can set that alarm from, let's say, like 50 degrees to 80 degrees. And if your temperature comes below 50 degrees, the alarm goes off. And if the temperature goes above 80 degrees, the alarm goes off. Therefore, if you're out in the field or in the house or whatever you're doing, and your stove goes out or your furnace quits at nighttime, you're avoiding, it's like having an insurance. You're avoiding a tragedy. And most of the time, when my alarm goes off, it's from the heat. Because you can have your greenhouse closed and you can be out in the barn feeding or something, and the sun comes out, and just in 20 minutes, you're going to have 100 degrees. So when you go from a 40 degrees at nighttime to 100 degrees in the daytime, it puts stress on your plant, and your plant will break down and get diseases and abort their blooms and misshapen fruit. So it's very important to have a uniform temperature and plenty of circulation. I have ceiling fans in mine and the ceiling. So when you have your greenhouse all closed in and you got stoves going to heat it, you need something to get air movement. If you got air movement, your leaves stay dry, and it's excessive moisture in a greenhouse that causes a lot of diseases.
What I, excuse me, what I hear in some of those comments, and maybe you too, are essentially not only feeding nutrients, feeding and watering the crop to supply those needs, but also how that process will influence disease, in this case, disease occurrence. So I think I heard Ernest say, and Fred saying, that reduce the stress on the crop, and that'll pay dividends in terms of disease, minimizing disease. And part of reducing that stress is irrigating and fertilizing properly. Are there any questions from the audience on the specifics of a plan? Mo, did you have your hand up?
Yes, we've got some houses that we look after, Mr. Wells, and that we are using compost now rather than moving the houses. We're using compost into the area where the plants are going. And a problem we're finding is that we're getting a spurt of growth out of our tomato plants because of the release of nutrients from the compost that we're not able to control, like we were when we were drip irrigating with the fertilizer. And I think that there's a mistake that kind of worries me, when a person first starts out, he thinks, well, he's got this wonderful compost, which is really great, but then we start adding this 2.5 pounds of triple 10 to that square footage, and then all of a sudden you've got a big burst of plant and no fruit. And I'd like to have some direction on that. I talked to Gary at Holmes Lab in hopes that, you know, there would be some direction headed so that we can control this a little bit, so there would be a test, you know, created that we can do that, because I have tomato plants that just absolutely overnight just grow like mad, especially in tunnel houses when the conditions of humidity is right.
Otho, is this I'm oversimplifying it, but is it just too much fertility there?
Could I ask a question?
Yeah,
Are
go
you
ahead.
using both compost and commercial fertilizer?
2 years ago we did, but now we are not.
No,
Just
I-
the compost.
Just the compost is all you need to add, yes.
And
Yeah.
it's important to get them plants off to a very good start. That's a very good thing, you know, but we thought a little fertilizer was essential, but,
I think a better approach to get the plants off to a good start would be to keep the fertilization moderate in the soil and use some type of a starter fertilizer at transplanting time, like the 9-15-30, or nothing's wrong with Miracle Grow either, 15-30-15, something high in phosphorus. So using that as a starter fertilizer, I think, is very good, along with a moderate amount of fertilization in the soil. And my recommendation, 2.5 pounds of triple 10 per 100 square feet, I think is pretty moderate, yes. But here again, that's a rule of thumb. I think a soil test is still better, because soil types vary all over the board.
but the release of the nutrients from the compost is hard to control.
But if you put the compost in, say, today, just for illustration, there will be that much release in the next week or two, I don't think, right, to cause really high nitrogen. I wouldn't think so.
We're putting the compost in about a month before we put the plants in.
Okay.
But we got heat in there, you know, and so in turn,
Okay. Well, perhaps you could cut down on the time, the lead time, if that's the problem. There's a-
1 second, Rob. I know, Fred, you were kind of leaning forward, wanting to say something to
The calcium level is also important in your ground. It balances your phosphorus, potash, or other trace elements. And you're talking about compost, which, is it already compost, or is it just halfway in the process? If you're using new manures, or if you're making a new compost and there's not enough time involved, it's going to be very high in nitrogen, and ingredients are going to be real active. A compost that's older is more broke down and won't be as powerful, won't be too rich for you.
this is older compost. This is compost that's been at least 2 years.
Well,
making.
Then you just got good soil.
Victim of good soil. Rob, did you want to add something to this?
I was wondering, is there big differences in the nitrogen composition of the type of compost that you're making, from animal compost or from plant, so forth?
Question is does the nitrogen content vary among composts beginning with different starting materials, animal, plant? Most emphatically, yes. I mean, those who have been using compost for a long time recognize from experience that all compost is not the same. And you really have to know what the starting material is and the age to know what the nitrogen content may be. And I'm just going to hop on the test wagon. We wouldn't put out a fertilizer without knowing its formulation. Why would we put out a compost without knowing its formulation? So test the compost, because it will come back with a % nitrogen by weight and so on and so forth. Now, it's absolutely the case, I believe, that the release that you mentioned, Mo, is not predictable. But here are some by gosh, by golly, seat of the pants estimates that I've been working with and using compost for the last 4 years, given to me by Ben Steiner and Dave McCartney here in the entomology department. And if Sonia's here, please correct me if I'm wrong. Basically, 10% available in the cropping year. Am I right on? 20. 20% available in the cropping year. Of N, 20% of the N. So if you got 100 pounds of N in that compost, you're actually going to have 20 available that year. And then it's 20% of the remaining each successive year. 5. Thank you. So it's 5% of the remaining each successive year. So if you start out with 100, you apply 100, you get 20 in that calendar year. You have 80 left over. 5% of 80. 5% of the remainder, 5% of the remainder, 5% of the remainder. So if all you've been doing is front-loading your compost, what you are seeing is not a reaction to this year's compost. It's a reaction to all the 5 or whatever years before. But you need to know the starting point. And it's absolutely correct that the weather and the climate, the soil moisture and temperature will influence the release. It's also the case that the time that you spread, the interval between when you spread it and incorporate it will affect what's available. Because if it's mostly ammonical nitrogen or nitrate nitrogen, if you spread that manure or compost on the soil surface and most of it's ammonia, what's most of it doing? Okay, you wait 2 weeks and then you get out there to incorporate it, you've lost your ammonical nitrogen. If it's nitrate and then you spread it, wait 2 weeks and it does nothing but rain for those 2 weeks, where's most of the nitrate gone? Away. So your starting point, the interval between when you spread and incorporate, and then the by golly estimates of 20% that year, 5% the following years, are just numbers to work with when it comes to using compost. I just thought I would throw that in on the compost side. And that's irrespective of organic or conventional. What have you learned, Fred and Ernest, what do you do differently now with your fertility and irrigation plan that you may not have been doing, say, 2 or 3 years ago in a tunnel?
Well, when I first started, I had a problem of irrigating too much at one time. And the past years, I've tried to irrigate more often and not as much at one time. And I really started to feed more foliage feed instead of through the drip line, because I got tomatoes in my greenhouse this fall again, and I got great looking plants, because I think the main reason is I've been spraying them maybe every other day with oxidate and copper and growers fertilizer, which keeps them growing, and it seems to I'm convinced it keeps the blight from coming as quick as it would otherwise.
I've been raising tomatoes for 13 years. I made most of my mistakes the first 3 years, and I haven't made any drastic changes in the last 5 years. If you see a problem, fix it right away, because it can become a problem. If you get a disease started, or you got a problem with the furnace, or whatever the problem is. I've had some carbon monoxide damage last year, which kind of hurt the production. We had a faulty furnace, and we knew there was something wrong when Brad's the one who detected it for me, what was wrong. So we might get a new furnace till next year. That would be one change.
Questions from the audience? We have another couple of minutes. I'm back here, sorry. A question? Yes, go ahead. Well, the tomato plants that were grown in those tunnels were mulched with straw. Okay? Now, this is your chance to boo and hiss. We had, 6 inches, 8 inches of straw in every tunnel on top of the raised beds. We took that straw out rather than turn it in. So that was a soil management, decision on my part. So as it would have been a huge amount of work to turn it in, but would it work? I think, well, it depends on the objective. I think as a soil improvement process, perhaps, but as a nitrogen sink, definitely, because then to break that straw down, the soil machinery would have latched onto that straw and needed more nitrogen to do it, which in the minus compost plots may have been a huge detriment, perhaps. So I'm not sure if I'm getting at your question entirely, but field hay. Okay. All right. Not just a straw. One final question I guess I'll just put to the audience and the panel. High tonal users that take their plastic off or move them just to get at what Scott is saying? I mean, expose the soil to the elements and let Mother Nature take care of some of the freeze thaw and everything else?
Yeah, I would agree to that. If you can afford to take it off for the winter, maybe every couple of years at least, because it gets so dry, way down deep. In a way, it might look moist, but it's dry down there. And the deeper the roots can go on vegetables, and vegetable roots can go really deep. They can go down to 3 and 4 or 5 feet deep. So if it's dry down there, the roots are not going to grow. So taking the cover off, rolling it up to the middle and leaving it there for the winter, I think would be a good thing to do occasionally. Can I say one other thing about oats versus winter rye?
Go right ahead. One final comment, yeah.
We had an interesting experience. As you all know, if you plant oats as a fall cover crop, they'll die during the winter when it gets cold. And we did that. And the next spring, we went in with a hand rototiller to rototill the plots. And those oat straws were like pieces of leather. And they completely wound around the rototiller. They really did. They completely bound it up. So we've done a winter rye because it doesn't die down during the winter time and it's there next spring. So that's our little tip for the day.
Well, we heard the praises of rye earlier today from Bob Jones, I think, as a cleansing crop. Again, maybe an unpopular move, but we're needing to move on to the next segment. And so let's give this panel a hand.
Good points.